Okay, so in today's session, I want to talk about automation tools offered by Databricks. So, what are the things that we want to automate? Basically, you have been learning Databricks. You know that we can connect to the Databricks workspace. It gives us a UI, browser-based UI, and in the Databricks workspace, we can create notebooks. We can write code there. Then we can execute those notebooks. We can create clusters. We can attach notebooks to the cluster. We can create that, run that notebook on the cluster. We can define jobs using workflows, and then we can schedule the jobs to automatically trigger at certain time, or maybe we can manually go and trigger the jobs. All that you already learned how to do using the Databricks UI. But in projects, everything is not done manually, right? At the end of the day, when your project is complete, you want to deploy it in the production environment. There are a lot of things that you want to automate or write code for doing things using the code, right? For example, uh, you might want to build a CI/CD pipeline for your project and automate few things using the CI/CD pipeline. Like as soon as you commit your code in your code repository, it should automatically trigger a build. When we say build, then your pipeline should automatically pull code from latest code from the repository, execute test cases, unit test cases, package everything, and then deploy all your notebooks and other type of code files that you have created to the Databricks workspace environment for your production environment. So that's one kind of automation. Then maybe you have written automation integration test. Maybe you have written a notebook where you have a code for doing integration testing. So you might want to automatically trigger that integration test from your CI/CD pipeline itself, right? So what you want to do is create a job cluster and run your integration test as a job on the cluster, right? And once that integration test is executed, it is passed, everything is passed, run a cleanup script. All those things you want to do using maybe CI/CD pipeline. Or for different other various reasons, you might want to write code for creating a job in your Databricks production environment. You don't want want someone to go and manually create the job, right? So how do we automate that? What kind of tools or what kind of capabilities Databricks offers us for the automation? That's the topic for the today. So Databricks offers three approaches for automating your work. First approach and the most frequently used approach is Databricks REST API. Documentation for REST API is, you can find it here. I'll show you. And then next thing is Databricks SDK. So REST API is like REST-based API. You can use these APIs to from any language that supports calling a REST-based API. Mostly all the languages, even Python, Java, Scala, every language supports calling REST-based API. So these are like universal. From any language, you learn only REST API, working with REST API, and you can use the same from any language. Then Databricks also offers a Databricks SDK, which are language-specific SDKs. So they have SDK for Python, they have SDK for Scala, they have SDK for Java. So the second approach is SDK, less used, but you have that option. And the third approach is Databricks CLI. So it's a command line tool, and you can use commands from the command line tool to do almost everything that you can do using the UI, right? So Databricks CLI is another tool for automation. So if we want to use Databricks CLI, then most likely we will be writing shell scripts to call different CLI commands to do whatever we want to do. And if you want to use REST API, then most likely you will be writing Python code for doing the automation. So I'll give you a quick demo of all these three approaches. Small examples I'll show how to use REST API, how to use Databricks SDK, and how to use Databricks CLI. A more integrated and more elaborate example is given in your capstone project, where we are using Databricks REST API for automating few things, and we are using Databricks CLI for building in the entire automated DevOps pipeline. So you will get a full-fledged example there. But today we want to learn how to use these tools and what we can do with these tools. So let's close the slides, and then we will go to the browser, and I'll help you with the documentation link so you can refer, because REST API is huge. So you go to Databricks REST API documentation. This is common documentation across all platforms. So you are working in Azure or in AWS or in Google Cloud or whatever. REST API is same for every platform. Documentation is also same. So if you look at the REST API, it is broken down into different areas. So you have Databricks Workspace REST API, which allows you to do everything in the workspace, right? Code to do everything that you want to do in the workspace. Like you can create grid credentials, you can do repository operations, and you can do secret operations. You can save credentials and create Databricks secrets. And inside the workspace, you can do get workspace object permissions, get workspace object permission level, delete workspace objects, create a directory, everything and anything that you do using UI, everything, there is a REST API for everything, right? So, and for compute related activities like cluster creation, cluster policy, cluster pools, all that you can handle using compute based REST APIs. Then you have REST API for workflows, for Delta DLT, for DBFS, for machine learning, for real-time serving, for access management, for Databricks SQL, for Unity catalog, for delta sharing, for other tokens and all that. Everything that you can do through the UI, you can do it through the REST API. So and these REST APIs, let's come to the Jobs API. Where is it? So Jobs API. Jobs API is one of the REST APIs which allows you to work with Databricks jobs, right? Workflow jobs. So you can list the job, and this is the API for this. API is this API /2.1/jobs/list. 2.1 is the API version. They have multiple versions. So latest one is 2.1. So and this is the API URL. And it is a GET API. If you know REST a little bit about REST APIs, there are some GET APIs, there are some POST APIs. So you get to know what is the REST API for job list. Maybe you have an API for creating a new job. So this is the API for creating a job, create API, and this is a POST API. And if you look at details, you have documentation for how to use it. But at high level, every API works in the same way. For making a call to that API, you have to provide some input. And that input is a JSON message that we call a request input. And once API is executed, it will give you a response. Response is also a JSON output. And that's how every API works. I will show you a demo for this. And in the documentation, you can see you have sample here. So a typical request for create API looks like this. For create API, jobs create API will create a job in your data frame in your Databricks workspace. And for creating a job, you have to specify a lot of things. So what is the job name? What is the schedule for the job? What are the different tasks in that job? Right. So all that you can specify using JSON. You don't have to manually write this JSON. We will see how to generate this JSON. But for creating a job, input is a JSON message that tells the API about the job definition. And in the response is simple. The response is also a JSON response, which tells you the job ID. So you are telling you are using this REST API to create the job. And once job is created, it will return you the job ID, which you can fetch. And at the bottom, you can see that you have 200 is the success response. So if your response is 200, you got a success, your job is successful, and it will also give you a job ID. It might give you some other HTTP code. So if you know programming or working with REST API in any reference, same concept applies here. So now you know where to look for different kind of APIs and details of the inputs and outputs, because this is an exhaustive list. Now let me show you one demo how to use it. So we'll go to our Azure account, and in Azure, I already have one workspace which I created. So let's go to the workspace and we will see now one example there. So this is my workspace. For doing anything, I'll need a cluster. So let me create a cluster here. Create compute. Let's create a single node cluster without photon. Terminate it after maybe 60 minutes. Right? DB is 0.75, so that's cheap. And cluster is creating. It will get created in a few minutes. Now I have this notebook. I stream test a notebook where I'm doing some work. So and using REST API for it. So let me explain what this notebook is. So let's assume I created an application, right? And for once that application is done, I also want to create a integration test case for that application, right? So I created an integration test case, and my application is a streaming application. So it's a stream processing, real-time stream processing application, which reads data from some source. And then I have a 3-layer architecture implemented, bronze layer and silver layer and then gold layer. So for bronze layer, silver layer, gold layer, there are so many jobs that I've defined, so many processes. So for bronze layer, I have defined 3-4 processes which will read data from a landing zone or from some sources, ingest it into the bronze layer table. Then there are some processes written to read data from the bronze layer and fill the silver layer, and similarly create the gold layer. That's a typical project. And now I want to write an automation test case for that streaming application, and that's what this notebook is trying to do, right? So at high level, what I want to do as an automation test is, first step, I want to create a job and trigger that job, and that job will run the entire workflow, right? But I don't want to go and manually create that job. That job is like, I can go to the workflow, Databricks workflow, and create a job manually, but I don't want to do that. What I want to do is, I want to write code for creating job, triggering the job, and then executing my test case, and then performing validation, and then performing cleanup after that. For everything, that entire test, I want to write code so that I can automate it. So how do we do that? I want to use REST API for doing that. So let's see what I'm doing. So basically, this notebook is taking some inputs at the beginning, 3 inputs: environment name, host, and access token, and then taking that into extracting that into the Python variable. You already learned all that. And then I have a setup notebooks written separately. So I'm importing the setup notebook and then creating instance of the setup notebook and running the cleanup method from the setup module. You will have a good sense of this when you come to the capstone project, because this is kind of part of the capstone project, your capstone project. So, but I'm using it for the demo. So cleanup method will clean everything, clean the environment, remove everything. And after the cleanup is done, what I want to do, I want to create a workflow job and trigger that job. So for creating a workflow job, I need to use the REST API, and this is the REST API for creating a job. So API.2./2.1/jobs.create. This is the call I want to make, and it's a post call. I'm using Python. So how do I do it in Python? In Python, there is a requests package which I will import. There is one more package, JSON, because I'll be passing argument as a JSON. Response will come as a JSON. So I need to handle some JSON operations. So I'm importing JSON package from Python. This is nothing to do with the Spark. These are pure Python packages. So I import that, and then using the requests, I'm making a post call, right? So request.post. That's how we make a REST API call in Python. So request.post, and why post? Because this is a post method. If it is a get method, I'll use request.get. So request.post, and request.post takes 3 arguments. First is the URL for the REST API. So URL should be host name, my workspace host name, right? In which Databricks workspace I want to run this REST API, right? So host name, which is a variable I created here in the beginning, host name. So I'll take the host name as an input for this notebook. So host name plus the REST API, plus the REST API. REST API URL you already learned from the documentation. This is the URL. So /API/2.1/jobs/create. So that's your REST API. And then next argument is the input parameter, the input JSON, right? So we know that REST API takes this kind of JSON, which defines the job, what job I want to create, right? So which defines the job. So I'm passing the JSON, and that JSON payload I already defined here. So if you look at the JSON payload, this is my job definition, right? This is my job definition from there to here. So how it looks, what is the name of the job? Do I need email notification? No. Webhooks? No. Timeout? No. Max concurrent runs? I want 1. What is the task in that job? So task name is SBIT stream, and it's a notebook task. So notebook can be found at this place. So in the workspace. So what I want this job to do is to run this notebook, right? And which cluster this notebook should run? So it should run on the job cluster, and then I define job cluster here. And for job cluster, Spark version should be this. And maybe it's a single node cluster, so Spark master should be this, right? And all those definitions are defined here for the cluster, and that's how I define the job, what job I want to create, right? But how do I get this JSON? So either you know all the JSON syntax from the documentation, everything is defined here, right? Or one easy way is to go to workflow, right? I'll come to workflow. Now I know I want to create a job, but I want to automate that job creation. But let's see how we will create the same job manually. So I can go to create job, create the job name here. Let's say SBIT stream test, and then one task in that job. I want only one task, so I'll create one task, run sbit notebook. I gave the name. Task name is notebook type. Source notebook can be found in the workspace. What is the path? So I'll come to notebook. I know where this notebook can be found. So I will come, and maybe I want this notebook to run, right? So I'll click this. Task is defined. Where I want this job to run on the job cluster. Yes. So let me edit that job cluster. I don't want this big job cluster. So I want a single node because my job is a small. Single node should work. And that's all. So this is my definition for the cluster. Confirm that, right? So I manually define the job. Dependent libraries. No, I don't want any libraries to install. What are the parameters? So and notebook parameters. So what parameters my notebook will need? So let me come to workspace, check my notebook. So let's say my notebook, this run notebook, what parameters it takes. So it takes 3 parameters, environment name, run type, and processing time, but all comes with the default value. So let me give one parameter, which is default as once. I want to set it to something else, right? So in the job creator, I can tell this is the parameter name, and value should be continuous. It should not be default 1. And I define this job, and that's how we do it using the UI, right? So let me create this job, or create this job. I'm not going to run this job. I just created the definition of the job, and then maybe I can come here and see view JSON, and this is my JSON for the job definition. So I can copy it and use it for my automation when I'm defining the job payload, job definition, right? When I'm defining the input. So this create job API requires an input JSON. You can manually prepare it, but nobody does that manually. So what we do, we generate the JSON, copy it, and then use it in our automation script, use it in our code, right? So now I have, I'm not going to replace that I already have similar JSON here. So that's how we define the JSON. So once we have the JSON, maybe here, I come here, cancel it, come back to jobs. Let's delete this job. So we have a clean slate here, right? So that's how we are defining the JSON. And once you have the JSON, it's simple. What I'm doing is create request.post, passing the URL, passing the JSON for converting this payload variable into a valid JSON. This looks like JSON, but it is not a JSON, right? It is a Python dictionary object. So we need to convert that job payload into a JSON. So for that, I'm using JSON.dumps and passing the variable here, which will convert it into a valid JSON. And then for running the REST API, we also need to provide the authentication token, right? So auth token, last parameter, which I'm taking as a input for this notebook, which can be supplied here, right? So what we will do, what this code is doing is making a call to the create job REST API. And once this is executed, we take the response in the create response. And from that create response, using the JSON method, I can take out the job ID, right? So this is Python code to parse the response JSON and take out the element, whatever element you want, right? So job ID element I want in return. So I'll take that job ID into a variable and print the job ID. And that's how we use the REST API. So you, and I'm using some more REST APIs here. Like next is jobs run now REST API. If you come to the documentation, create job API, you saw how to use it. Maybe run job API, where it is list job, get single job, trigger a new job. So trigger a new job is a post API. This is the URL. So once I created the job, it will only create the job in the Databricks workflow, right? But we need to trigger the job. So to run that job, we have another API, run now API, as per the documentation here, right? So I'm making another call to run API. And for running the API, I need input. Run API takes job ID at the minimum to run the given job ID. There are a lot of other things you can provide, but bare minimum is the job ID. It will run once. If you want to schedule it on a regular interval and all that, you have to provide all the details. So this run payload JSON I have built here, which gives only job ID and some notebook parameters. So I'm passing those notebook. You saw my run notebook. This job is supposed to run the run notebook, and run notebook takes 3 arguments, right? So I can also pass those arguments from here. So environment, I'm passing environment run type, I'm passing streaming processing time, I'm passing 1 second. So these three arguments I'm passing and then making a call. And once it is executed, I'm taking a response back in the run response variable. And from this run response, I'm taking the run ID. So this code will give me a run ID. I'll print it. Why I need a run ID? Because I want to monitor. I created a job. I took the job ID, and then using this job ID, I'm running the job here, passing the job ID in the JSON input, and then took the run ID, and using that run ID, I'm waiting for the status of the job. So another REST API I'm calling here is jobs.get, right? So if you get a single job run, so this API gives me the status of the current job or whatever job we want. So I want to monitor that job because triggering a job will launch a new job cluster and then start the job. So until that cluster is created and the job status is changed from pending to running, I want to wait here. And that's why I've created a while loop here. And in the while loop, I'll sleep for 10 seconds and then get the job status, take the response in the status, and from the status, I'll take out task.state.lifecycle state. That I learned from documentation about the response here. So if you look at the where it is. Okay, so this is a response sample itself. So once job is created, if in the get, you will get everything in the response. So in the response, what I want to track is tasks, state, and lifecycle state. So I'll have tasks here, and in the tasks, it's an array of tasks because job can have multiple tasks. I know my job is having a single task, so I take the first element of the task and then look at the state. So in the task, I have state, and inside the state, I have life cycle state, which will be pending in the beginning. Later, it will be running, and finally, once if I terminate the job, it will be terminated, right? So I'm taking life cycle state, and then it comes into the job state, and we keep on looping until it is pending, right? So that's how we build the logic. So once my job is started, then I want to write my test cases. So in test cases, I want to load some historical data. Then I want these are the packages I import. So code is here. So I want to load some these are object creations. So once the job is started, I want to produce first batch of data, then validate first batch of data, then maybe sleep for 2 minutes so that data is picked up by the bronze layer. So then I validate picked up by the all three layers, right? So then I validate bronze layer. Then I call the validate function for silver layer. I can call the validate function for gold layer. Then I produce second batch of data. All that is there. And once I'm done with, if all this runs successfully, all my automation or my integration test is passed. It is assumed to be passed. If it fails, then you will get the error. And once everything is done, then again, I'll use the one more REST API to cancel the job, because it's a test job, right? Once testing is done, I want to cancel that job. And then I also want to delete that job. So for that, I'm writing REST API. And at the end, I have a success method. So that's how I automated it. If I run it, you will see everything happening. So let's run it. Let me close everything else. For running it, I need to connect it with a running cluster. And I need to provide these inputs, right? So dev is fine. Databricks workspace URL, because I want to create job in this workspace itself. But if you want to create job in your QA workspace, you will provide QA workspace URL as an input. But I want to run it in the same workspace, so I can provide the URL for the same workspace. And URL is like, you start from here up to this place. The rest all are URL arguments. So you copy this and paste it here. Maybe slash is not required at the end, and that's your workspace URL. This code will create a job. So for creating a job, you also need to authenticate. For authentication, we need a token. So we already know where to find it, where to create a token, right? So you can go to user settings, right? And UI keep on changing. So they changed the user settings page now. In the preferences, in the developer menu, you will find access token. Click manage. Already 2 tokens I created. So let me delete these. I don't need this. So generate a new token. You can give comment. This is temporary. I will delete it later. And lifetime for this token 1 day only. This token is created. So I copy this token and paste it here as an argument, right? So now we are ready to run. Right, so I can run one by one, or I can run all. This notebook will run, and you will see everything in action. But let's go one by one so that we can see what is happening. Variables are defined. We got the variables in the Python. imported the setup, and then I ran the cleanup. So cleanup module will do the cleanup, clean the environment and prepare it for running my integration test. That's part of a typical project. Almost every project may have a cleanup script if you are willing to do an automation testing. So cleanup is done. Then I define my job payload. And then from here, I can start making call to REST API. So as soon as I execute that, what it will do? This code will create a new job, right? So let's open workflow and see. We don't have any job here, right? So if this works correctly, then I should automatically get a job created here. So let me run this. Done, job created, and this is the job ID, right? If you come here, you can see SBT stream job is created. It's not running, but job is created. You can click here and see it says run now. It's not running. Come to task. There is a one task definition. All the notebook details, job cluster configuration, everything is in place. So job is created. It's not running, but I have a code to run it also. So here is an example how to run a job using REST API. So let me run this, and it should. Job is started. Run ID this. If you come here, you can confirm. Okay, job runs shows here. So job runs, it's running, and it's in pending state because it's launching a job cluster, and it takes maybe 4 or 5 minutes to launch a cluster. So let's run this part. This part will keep on waiting until the job cluster is created and job is in running state. So we know that status is pending, and that's what we are tracking here. So this will wait for 10 seconds and print pending, wait for another 10 seconds, and then check for the status, print pending. And we are keep on waiting until the job starts, because until the job cluster is created, job is started, there is no point in running our test cases. They will definitely fail. They won't find any data. So all the validation will fail. So this is how we can wait for the job to start. So as soon as it is started, we will come out of it. So maybe all that we can run, it will perform the validation, and at the end, I have a script to do the cleanup. So that's how we use REST API. So hope it made sense, and you become familiar with how to use REST API for automating things in Databricks environment. And we will use this technique fully with a proper example, end-to-end example in our capstone project. We are nearing to the point where we should start talking about the Databricks capstone project. So you will learn that soon. What we are left with, two more approaches for automation, Databricks SDK and Databricks CLI. So we are already consumed a lot of time, so maybe it won't be possible to cover Databricks SDK and CLI today. Maybe I'll cover it in the next session. And yeah, while this is waiting for cluster to start, we can take some questions.